I think we're live. Good evening, everyone. Spencer, how are we doing today?
Good. How you doing, buddy?
I'm doing good. So welcome, everybody. This is another episode of Shimano School. My name is JP DeRose. I am joined by Spencer Samplawski, I assume. I'm pretty bad with last name. Did I nail it?
You got her, buddy. Yep.
Nailed it. All right. So we're joined with Spencer, and we're going to be doing what we do every week. And we're looking to educate everybody. So if you're tuning in, I want to know a couple things. One, let me know where you're tuning in from, because I love seeing everybody who's out there. We've had people from all over the world watching these things. So let me know where you're checking in from in the comment section. Just put a comment. And this is going out to both our Facebook viewers on the Shimano page and our YouTube viewers on the Shimano page. So give us a hello. We're going to be answering questions tonight, but tonight's focus is really going to be, let me just brighten my light up so my thing isn't flickering. Tonight's focus is going to be all about big fish, targeting big fish. This is one of Spencer's specialties. It's an awesome opportunity for you as viewers to ask questions if you have specific questions. We got a bunch of people tuned in already. This is awesome. So just let me know where you're from. We got Texas checking in, Lance, Michigan, the Upper Peninsula is checking in. So folks, welcome. I hope everybody is doing well. Without further ado, Spencer, what is going on in your world right now?
We are fully into trout and our salmon season right now. So I do all of our trout and salmon stuff on the big lake. And by big lake, I mean Lake Michigan. I guide out of Sturgeon Bay, kind of up and down the coast, depending on where the fish are. But right now, July is full-blown trout and salmon. I live in a beautiful area as far as diversity. I start my spring when I get home from Florida. I go right into smallmouth bass. I'm sorry, let me rewind that. I go right into walleyes in April, and then I move right into bass in May. May through, call it middle of June, and then June I kind of transition into salmon and trout. And then it kind of takes off from there into August, September's a little bit of everything, and then October's basically bass and walleyes. November, I get into a pretty wicked brown trout bite, and then I go into bass. I mean, we just live in such a cool area as far as species and how they set up and why they set up. And then I go to Florida in the winter. And it's fun. But right now, it's full-blown trout and salmon for sure.
Awesome. Well, it sounds like what you have in Wisconsin, you're in Wisconsin, I assume.
Yep.
You have a lot of what we have in Ontario. I mean, really a lot of
Very
the Northeast
similar.
Surrounding the Great Lakes. Those migratory trout and salmon, phenomenal smallmouth and walleye fishing, musky fishing.
Sure.
Largemouth bass. We kind of got, we're lucky. Let's call it fortunate.
Yeah. I honestly, it's funny you say that, JP. I relate a lot of this area to a Lake Ontario or, a Niagara area because the species are there. The trout salmon are there. The bass walleyes are there. Everything. It's great. You don't have to drive far. Everything here is within 20-minute drive. Everything there is within a 20-minute drive. So, it's similar area, but very far, demographically.
All right, so we got a bunch of people checked in now watching. So Upper Peninsula was the last one I checked, but we got Long Island, Ernesto, how you doing, bud? Orangeville, Ontario, Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, Lower Peninsula, Michigan, Winnicott, Wisconsin. That's your area, I guess.
He's not allowed to watch.
Ryan, you've been told you can't absorb any of the information we're going to give you here tonight. Four Corners, Florida. And we've got people from Wawa, Ontario. Mitchell, how you doing, bud? Ottawa, Ontario. Edwards just coming up from Lake Ontario for salmon. Southern Ontario, Lake St. Clair. So a good spread of people coming in, and there'll be more and more. So folks, like I said, if you could do me a favor, click the share button. This will help us get the word out. We're going to be talking tonight. Again, this is Shimano School. Spencer and myself will be targeting big fish. Spencer is a specialist at it. Hi, Sarah, Charleston, South Carolina, tuning in. Port Washington, Wisconsin, Elora, Ontario. People from all over. It's the greatest thing about social media.
Yeah, it's great.
This many people while you're sitting in your garage and I'm sitting in my basement.
Absolutely. Yeah, social media is wicked, man. It's changed our industry. It's changed so many industries, but I look at the fishing industry in particular and how much it's changed this industry in the last 5 years. And it's nothing but positive, and it's nothing but things like this. People can learn so much, whereas 6 years ago we had to go to a sport show, right? Well, in our day and age now with COVID and all that. We don't have sport shows anymore. This is our new sport show. So, and how convenient. You watch from your house, you watch it come home from work, wherever you are. So no, it's social media has changed the fishing industry. Some may say for the bad, some may say for the good. I am 100% all for the positive in situations like this or learning new areas. And that's one thing I'm going to get into when we get into this is, you know, a lot of people say, how do we know where big fish are? Well, it's all in front of you. Just look, learn. And this is one way to do it. And doing those little things of homework of just knowing where those fish live. And then once you're there, everything kind of takes off from there once you're in there. But one of the biggest things, I don't want to get too in depth with this, but one of the biggest things is just doing stuff like this, learning from people that have made the mistakes, have spent the hours of catching nothing, because I've spent weeks of catching nothing. So yeah, we'll get into that more, but no, social media is great. I'm glad you guys are all here.
All right. And this is a perfect example right here. Owen, how are you? From Dubai.
Yeah. What's up, man?
So
I don't know
that's
anything
pretty
about
cool.
Dubai,
Right? Watching on our YouTube channel, which is awesome. So folks, we're going to do this. Let's get through targeting big fish. I know Spencer's got a ton of knowledge, and if you have questions, I want you to type them in the comment section. I will get to as many as I can. If I don't get to your question, it might be because we already answered something very similar to it. In that case, I've got some great news for you. These are going to live forever on both our YouTube channel and our Facebook channel. So you're going to be able to go back. If you want a refresher, you can watch them. If you missed a portion of this, you can go back and start it from the beginning as well once the broadcast is over. So let's get rolling here, Spencer. Let's talk about catching big fish. You said it's all about location and learning. The one piece of advice I took from the Lindners years and years and years ago, and I make it a part of a lot of my seminars, is the F plus L plus P equals S formula that they created. The fish plus presentation plus location equals success. So why don't we break it down that way? Let's talk about location. Yeah. You talked about this with me.
Yeah,
before.
I mean, let's start with location. I mean, location above all and beyond, I believe, is the most important thing. I mean, if you have a chance at catching a 7-pound smallmouth, let's just start with smallmouth. If the 7-pound smallmouth is there, it's there. If it's not, it's not. Now, we don't necessarily know it's not there, but if we have a history in the past of knowing a tournament or a YouTube video or whatever it may be, we know those fish live there. Let's start there and let's go there, right? But if we know of a small lake in northern Minnesota that only has 3 to 4 pound smallmouth, well, if you're looking for a 7-pound smallmouth, we're not going to go there. So I think the biggest thing is put yourself in a situation where you have a chance at catching a big smallmouth, a big walleye, or a big lake trout, or whatever it may be. And again, we get kind of stuck in this, like the size of the fish is everything, but we don't necessarily need to. But if you're looking for big fish, and big fish are, kind of what we're achieving, I guess, set yourself up in those areas. So do the homework before you even go there. Figure out where those fish live, and that's going to set all of this whole stage is going to make sense if we're in the right areas and we know that those fish live there. And if you want to get into the location more technically, like for example on the Bay of Green Bay, there's like 5 lakes within the Bay of Green Bay. Lake Ontario, there's 5 lakes within Lake Ontario. The St. Lawrence River, same thing. So break it down to Green Bay, but then break it down to where we're fishing on Green Bay, where we're fishing on the St. Lawrence River. And I think it's just going to help you mentally, digest the lake, but more importantly, you're just going to have more confidence when you're in that area and when you have that confidence bait in your hand. So location is number 1 for sure.
All right. Well, there's some great advice, but let's talk about the fish themselves and understanding them. So sure. Again, the formula they said was fish plus location plus presentation. How important is it to understand, the migration, the eating habits, the structure of the fish? Like, there's a lot of research that can be done before you even get in the water, is there not? For sure.
I mean, you look at like a fall situation in a river. Walleyes may run up a river to feed on whether it be smelt, whether it be herring, whether it be shiners, whatever it may be. So figure out where those locations are in a big body of water and break it down to that particular area in a river. Or in the spring, I need to figure out where the warmest water is in that whole entire system, in that whole entire bay, or wherever it may be, you need to be on the warmest water. You need to be in the fall. Sometimes you need to be in the warmest water, or you need to be in the water where the most bait is. So breaking down that area and then moving forward into, kind of why those fish are in that area, like a river or a bay or a current seam or whatever it may be. And then once you're in that particular area, figure out, water temps with walleyes. Let's say we're using, if water's under 55 degrees, we're going to use a lipless crank. We're going to use a hair jig. If the water's over that, we may use a crank. We may use a spinner. If we're looking at bass, we may use a hair jig. We may use more of a finesse tactic. But figuring out those locations, and then once you're in those locations, use your confidence bait for that specific temperature or that specific time of year. And the biggest thing I tell people is, if you've caught, let's say, a 14-pound walleye on something in the past, use that bait, because in the back of your head, we are still human. We're not all KVDs. Okay, use the bait that works, that you've had confidence in, because I can guarantee you that it's going to work for you in that same situation, that same water temperature, the same area, the same everything. For me, my confidence bait with like a walleye, for example, in 45 to 55 degree water in the spring is hands down a lipless crankbait, a hair jig, a plastic for like bass. I'd be using a bucktail hair jig, a marabou hair jig, a small swim bait, a small jerk bait. Use those confidence things. Like for me, example with guiding, if I have a customer that catches a 6-pound bass within the first hour on a swim bait, that customer is going to feel way more confidence throwing that swim bait for the next 8 hours than he would be if I switched him out every half hour. And then he's just going to get all, mentally confused as to what I'm trying to do with him or what I'm trying to do. Simple it down for yourself. Whether you fish 100 tournaments a year, whether you fish one tournament a year, whether you've never fished in your life, use one bait a day that you have confidence in and stick with it, and don't stop that bait. Because if they're going to eat it, they're going to eat it. If they're not, then you maybe need to switch up, but use a confidence bait once you know where those fish are.
Some great advice there. And you kind of slid right into the P part, the presentation part. So I think the biggest thing for a lot of people to understand is that fishing is that. It's a formula. It is, you got to know where they are. You got to know what they want to eat, and then you got to know what to throw at them. So
correct. Yeah.
Spencer gave us a quick rundown, folks. So for those of you just tuning in, my name is JP DeRose. I'm here with Spencer Samplawski. We are targeting big fish here on Shimano School. It's another Tuesday night. Every other week, we do this. We look to educate our viewers, anybody who wants to learn more about the great sport of fishing, whether it is targeting Great Lakes fish or saltwater offshore or deep jigging, we've done it all. A great resource would be to go through either our Facebook page or our YouTube channel videos, as we have been doing these for quite some time, and we've covered a pretty good myriad of topics. So that's an option as well. So let's take a couple questions here, Spencer, if you're cool with that.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, so first one's from James Curry. James, how you doing? What's the difference about fishing a reservoir versus a lake? What are the main differences?
Oh, man. Well, I think a reservoir versus a lake, whereas the reservoir, I think you're going to have more, probably in a reservoir, you're going to have more current, if anything. A reservoir, you may have more, I don't want to say man-made bottom, but you're going to have more of like a mud or more of a kind of a stagnant bottom, whereas a lake, you may have more natural bottom, like rock, sand, rubble, whatever it may be. The reservoir thing is tough, and I honestly haven't spent a lot of time smallmouth fishing reservoirs, and I think they're, a smallmouth is a smallmouth, they're all going to relate, but I think in a reservoir, that's a really good question, James. Good for you. I think a reservoir, you're going to probably want to potentially start a little bit deeper, just because the water is naturally going to be a little bit warmer. You may have a little bit more current in a reservoir, depending on if it's dammed or not, or whatever that may be. But again, smallmouth all relate. So I would, in the spring, I would definitely start shallow and look for the warmest water you can, but also look for stained water, look for, currenty water that's kind of mixed up. And then in the summer, in a lake or reservoir, I would kind of move deeper being 10 to 20 feet. I know it's kind of broad, but deeper, the better, just when the water starts to kind of warm up a little bit. And then in the fall, don't be afraid to look shallow, but don't be afraid to look super deep either, in 25, 30 feet. But as far as the differences of both of them, James, that's a really good question, James. And I think we could talk about that for about 3 weeks. That's a tough question.
You're absolutely right. I mean, for myself, we have very few reservoirs up here in Canada, more natural lakes.
Yeah, we don't have any by me, honestly.
Yeah. And I think that's more of a southern thing, but the things I've noticed from fishing reservoirs is you don't get that natural weed growth that you traditionally do in a natural lake. And you tend to not have the shallow, expansive flats in a reservoir in a lot of cases as you would in a natural lake as well. So I find steeper banks, timber becomes oftentimes the number one structure, or ledges becomes the number one structure.
Yeah,
exactly. And I knew where you were going with it, Spencer.
Yeah.
You touched on the fact you didn't want to say the word man-made, but yes, man-made because it was flooded.
Right.
And at one point, people lived on the area that we're fishing, right? Yeah. So I know reservoirs that have foundations from houses in them, and a reservoir really is fluid now, because the St. Lawrence River is technically a reservoir, because once they put the locks in, they raise that water level up high enough to flood foundation areas and everything else. So, James, you got some great advice there. I would say just don't be afraid to go from shallow to deep and figure out what those fish are doing, because every day is different on the water. That's what I love about fishing. Every day offers you a different challenge, whether weather or something else. All right, so let's take another one here. Anthony from our YouTube channel. How you doing, Anthony? What pushed you over, Spencer, to become a guide?
Yeah, that's a good question. So I truly enjoy teaching people, believe it or not. I know there's a lot of people that don't want to guide because of the spot thing, or they don't want to, lose their areas or whatever. But I genuinely enjoy teaching people new things. One thing that keeps me fresh is I do a few different species. So, it's easy for me to not get, like, I don't want to say run down, or I don't want to use the word burnout, but I love teaching people and showing people, and how can I basically show people the mistakes that I've made, or eliminate people to make the mistakes that I've made. And I guess what kind of pushed me over to becoming a guide was I realized that I could continue my passion for fishing and showing people what I love to do and how I love to do it. But more importantly, I was able to sustain a living doing it. And I did it in college, actually, not knowing that I was going to be able to do it or be successful at it and kind of make a living at it. And it was one of those things I just didn't stop. I just kept going, and I kept pushing forward, pushing. And I made many years where it was like, is this worth it? Is this worth it? Am I going to be able to do this? Do I need to get a full-time job and guide? And then, one day the light bulb just kind of goes off, and you grow, and you grow your clientele base, and you grow, whether it be on social media, the internet. And then all of a sudden it's like, hey, now I can do this full time. And I ended up just kind of rolling with it, honestly. And here I am today, and it's great. I love it. I love the people that I meet. I love the connections that I've made from it. And I still to this day have customers that I've had for 10 years, and they're friends. I mean, a lot of my customers are friends. And it's great. I love it. I just, I really, truly enjoy teaching and showing. And that was probably the number one thing that pushed me over was just showing people what I do every day. And I hate to say it, but getting paid for it was great. So yeah, no, that's a good question, Anthony. I appreciate it.
All right, Anthony, thanks very much. Over on our YouTube channel. And again, folks, we are doing another Shimano School here on both Facebook and YouTube. If you could do us a favor, click the like button. That helps. Click the share button. Better yet, if you have a buddy who has a hard time catching big fish, tag them in the comment section. They'll be brought directly to this video, and they can watch it after.
A lot of buddies I can tag now.
Spencer says he's got a lot. I got a lot of buddies as well that could use that help, dude. Trust me. All right, so another one. This is right along the guiding thing. Advice for guides who want to get into guiding, because there's a lot more than starting a web page and saying I'm a guide. There's things you have to do, are there not?
100%. And one of the biggest things I can tell you is when you're down or when you're, in the dumps and you're like, oh man, I don't know if I can make this, or, I don't know if I want to go fishing today, go. Because every single day I go fishing, every single day, whether it be this morning, this afternoon, whatever it is, I learn something. Every single day you learn something, and every single day you're not out there, you don't learn something. And don't think that you have to be on the water just to learn. Just by you watching this, you're learning something, or by you picking up the phone and talking to your buddy who did fish that day and you wanted to see how the day was and how he did, you're still learning something, you're still progressing something from him fishing and you not. One of the thing I would highly recommend, and I did this at a young age, is surround yourself with people who are successful, but more importantly, surround yourself with people who you would like to be, or you could see yourself being, because you are going to mirror them, and they are going to be the best people you have to look up to seek advice through, and hold on to those people and really reach out to them daily, weekly, whatever. I mean, I have a lot of friends that I talk to once a month, once every couple months, but these are the people that I started basically networking with when I was younger and learning from them. I'm teaching them something. They're teaching me something. We can't all have too many friends. So just keep your head down, keep learning. But the number one thing I have is surround yourself with people that you necessarily would want to be, whether it be another guide. Don't be afraid to hire that guide. Don't be afraid to, befriend him, talk to him. Hey, do you need help with anything this week? Can I come over to your shop and help you do something? Can I come help make jigs for you? Whatever it may be. But I would say the biggest thing is just never stop. You're always learning. Your mind is a sponge. Don't burn yourself out by going every day, but use your time wisely. And if you think you have 2 hours to go learn something, go. You're going to learn so much by just going on the water and doing it. It's a good question.
All right, Jason, hopefully that helps you out there. Great question. Let's keep moving along with questions. We're getting questions, so we'll keep popping them. Grant from our Facebook page is asking, Kronark G, good for freshwater, even though it is good for saltwater mostly. Have you had any experience with the Kronark?
Yeah, I use them. I use them a lot in the fall, actually, for A rigs or big cranks, or I don't do a ton of like flipping or punching or stuff like that, just because my area isn't really set up for that. But yeah, that's a great reel for freshwater as well as saltwater. To kind of go off the kronark, I would say probably my favorite reel is the Tranks family, just because it's fast, it's durable. I mean, you can beat the heck out of it. The drag system in that reel is second to none. I mean, you can hook it up to your truck and drive a mile away, and it's not gonna blow out on you. But the kronark's good. It's smaller, it's lighter for sure. I use that reel a lot in the fall for A rigs, cranks and stuff like that. Yep, it's a great reel for both. And honestly, all of Shimano's bait casters you can use for both. It doesn't need to be freshwater or saltwater. They're great reels for both.
Yeah, I agree 100%. Grant, if the Kronark G's main thing that they changed on it was the drainage system inside of it because of the salt water and how bad it is on reels, it is a great performer for freshwater as well. And there is not a reel that we make. I mean, you could take anything, a Twin Power XD 4000, and it'll be a phenomenal
for sure
freshwater spinning reel, just as much as it's a phenomenal freshwater or saltwater spinning reel. So yes, you've got a good one in your hands. If you've got a Kronark G,
don't get rid of it. I have some old school ones I still have.
Go easily.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. All right. So trolling question coming at you. So for those of you who don't know, Spencer fishes for everything. Much like what I love to do is use the resource. It is best at certain times of the year. So from smallmouth and walleye, like he mentioned, over to trolling for trout and salmon, we're going to take a couple trolling questions as well. Cade,
sure.
I hope you're doing well, bud. So when trolling for salmon in the summer, what tips can you give us to help locate the salmon on big bodies of water like a Great Lake?
Yeah, absolutely. Great question. I fight this every day. I fought this morning, actually. We had some big winds the last couple of days, and our temps, believe it or not, actually warmed up. One of the biggest things I can tell you for locating fish in the summer trolling is pay attention to your electronics. If you're not using some kind of like depth probe or temp probe, you really need to start, because that is the number one thing that our fish are are chasing is warm water to cold water. And once you figure out what temp those fish want to be in, or what temp you figure out what the bait wants to be in, the fish are going to be there. So the biggest thing for me is figuring out kind of the general area they're in. But then if the water's too warm, I'm going to realize and see that on my temp probe, and I'm going to head out deeper and get into some colder water. But one of the biggest things that I can look for if I don't have that is just bait. Everybody, well, I shouldn't say everybody, but I think we all in this day and age have some kind of fish finder or, something that's going to help us see the bottom. And within that, you're going to see bait higher in the column, wherever that may be. But if there's bait in an area, there's going to be fish in an area. They're all fish. They have to eat. They have to feed. And when they're on a big, open, vast area like a Great Lake or wherever it may be, they're going to be around that bait. So paying attention to your graph as far as bait, temp, stuff like that is probably the number one thing. And then if you get bit on a lead core rod or a copper rod or whatever, put that in your pocket, use that for you, and realize that they're biting at that depth for a reason. There might be a temp break at that depth. So, I'm going to try and mimic that depth on a downrig or on a dipsy or whatever it may be. And pay attention to little things as far as, picking apart that area and not knowing where those fish are. But if you do get one bite, use it in your advantage. And I know I mentioned the temp probe, but those things, that tool to me in my arsenal is so important. I mean, I tell people every day, if that didn't turn on, I don't know if I could come out here. And it's because I have so much confidence in it. I've seen how crucial it is with speed and temp. And that's probably my number one secret is that tool of a probe or a something along those lines for sure.
So are you talking about like something, I'm not very familiar with temp speed, but I know Fishhawk makes a good one.
Yep. That's the one I use is Fishhawk. It gives me temp and speed at the ball. So when I say that, I'm saying I have a 10 or 12 pound downrigger ball. I send that down. The probe is attached to that. And I send it down. Let's say right now I'm fishing. I sent it down today, 48 feet, within 40 to 50 feet. So the currents on top in a Great Lake, the current up on the top of the water is totally different than the current down below. And what I mean by that is, let's say we had a big north blow coming out of the north the last 3 days. But what happens is the water flips. So your water on top will actually come down and the water on the bottom will be different. So if I'm going south, but the current's coming out of the north, naturally I need to slow down because what's going to happen is I'm going to be going so fast on top and my ball is going to be getting blown back. I need to slow down. And the only way I know that and the only way I can see that undertow current is through that probe because it gives me the temp, it gives me the speed of what's going on down below. So my boat speed may be 2 miles an hour, but my ball speed may be 3.5 miles an hour. Well, I just need to slow my boat speed down. I just need to slow it down maybe to 1 mile an hour. And I've done it. I did it today. So again, it's a current thing on the Great Lakes. It's current seams galore. I mean, they're everywhere out there. Those fish follow them. They track them. And that temp probe really eliminates knowing where the current is or what the current's doing for sure. It's a good question.
So that's your speed side of it. And then your temp is really to help you isolate the thermocline in the water. Which
for sure.
That hard layer of perfect temperature water that we like to use. Yeah,
we don't see a crazy thermocline. Like right now I'm fishing pretty shallow in my region, 60 to 120 feet. But in the summer, like in August, when those fish push deep, 200 to 300, 400 feet, that's where the temp really starts to make a difference. I start to see those thermoclines setting up out deep. And again, that's where that probe really makes a difference. And I realize they're not cheap. I realize it's a tool you may only use for 2 to 3 months. But, if you do a lot of walleye trolling, if you do a lot of, any kind of other trolling for browns, whatever, you can use those probes all year round and use them as a tool for you. And they do work. I mean, a lot of guys in Lake Erie use them for trolling walleyes. Not a lot of guys use them in my region, but I know they work elsewhere. So use them. I mean, the thing is, it's a 10-year investment. I tell people they're never going to go bad. It's something that hasn't really changed over the last 20 years, and they're a deadly tool. Use them.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I have a good buddy, Captain Paul Powis, one of our Shimano field staffers. He's a guide out of Erie, Ontario. Same thing. He lives and dies by his Fishhawk. He's actually running the riggers that have it integrated into it via Bluetooth. So he's got all that information. you know, back in the day, I've done limited amounts of trolling, but I've done enough of it to pretty much understand the program. Back in the day, I would look for the current based on blowback on the cables.
Yeah.
Whether they're straight back.
Yeah. Oh, I still do that today too. Yeah.
Right, left or right would tell you which way the current's moving, and that's your best way. But now it's brainless with a fish hawk. It makes it so much easier to figure that out.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah, you nailed it.
Yeah. All right. So here's one. Dale, hope you're doing well. Any sleeper deep smallmouth presentations? A lot of guys talk about the Carolina rig. Anything you would recommend for deep smallmouth, like a presentation that's not so common?
Yeah, no, that's a good question. You know, I think I'll be honest with you. I don't use a lot of Carolina rigs for smallmouth here. Our smallmouth here are very, very particular as far as size. They like eating smaller baits. But no, that's a good question. You know, I think one of the biggest things with deep smallmouth is, at least from what I found in my region, is people just overwork the bait. I mean, truly, I think whether you're using a Ned rig, a tube, drop shot, whatever it may be, I don't care what you're using. My little slogan with customers in the summertime is throw it out there and forget about it. Throw it out there and just kind of drift with the current. You know, my buddy calls it dumping the spool, opening your bail, just kind of let it free fall. You know, so I think in this day and age, there's really nothing's a secret as far as like a bait or a presentation or a sleeper, you know, bait, if you will. But I think the biggest thing is people overworking baits. But I think the other thing too is people using too heavy of line. A lot of people don't pay attention to not only the fluorocarbon we're using, but more importantly, the braid. I love 5 pound Power Pro. And I honestly, there's not a reel that I would have more, whether it's spring, summer, or fall, honestly. I mean, in the fall, I might bump a little bit, but if you're using anything more than 5 pound Power Pro, man, what your line is doing underwater and how tight you are to the tip of your rod would probably blow your mind if you saw the big bow in your line or the big slack in your line. So I think use what you're using and use, again, what you've had confidence in, but use less line. Don't use 10 pound braid. I wouldn't even buy 10 pound braid anymore. Fluorocarbon's a tough one because bottom content can really change how you fish as far as setting the hook or your line nicks the bottom or whatever. You know, don't be afraid to use 6 pound fluorocarbon, but don't also be afraid to use 8 pound fluorocarbon. I don't use a ton of 6 pound fluorocarbon. The problem with 6 pound fluorocarbon is if you set the hook too hard or your drag is not set right on your reel, you're going to break off a lot of fish. And if you do have a zebra mussel, you know, nick or a rock nick or whatever it may be, and you go to set the hook hard, it's going to break. So I think the biggest thing would be using less of a braid. And one of those things, again, is that 5 pound floor or that 5 pound Power Pro is a big one. And I think don't think that you need to like use this secret bait. I think you just need to change your presentation and how you're presenting that bait more than anything, honestly. I'll get back to the Carolina thing. I don't know if our bass would even eat that, honestly, Dale. They're pretty smart here. Yeah, but they probably would. I mean, they would for sure. It's just, again, dummy down the line, use smaller line, and I think any presentation that you've ever used will work better. Honestly, I do.
I honestly couldn't agree more with you. I mean, my spinning reels all have 5 or 8 pound Power Pro on them.
Yeah.
And what people don't realize, here's a fun fact, because I spoke to the people at the Power Pro factory years ago about 5 pound, because they were like, why are you ordering so much 5 pound? I said, because I can't break it. I cannot break 5 pound. He said, you know why you can't break it is because 5 pound Power Pro will actually break up to 16 pounds of strength.
Right.
So it's a lot stronger than what the 5 pound is the bare minimum breaking strength ever possible on that braid.
Correct. Yeah.
But on average, it's probably more of a 14 or 16 pound breaking strength.
Yeah.
And yes, I agree 1,000%, Spencer, on people using too light of a fluorocarbon leader.
Yeah.
For myself, I probably live on some of the clearest water out of all the places in the world, with the St. Lawrence, Lake Ontario, Lake Erie. And I don't ever use less than 10 pound fluorocarbon as a leader.
Yeah.
And on Lake Erie, when I'm dragging tubes, I'm throwing 16, 18, and 20-pound fluorocarbon as my leader because I'm dealing with massive zebra mussel populations.
Right.
And I don't want to retie all the time.
Yeah, for sure. And if you're using like a presentation like a swim bait, for example, and you're not nicking bottom lots, really, really use lighter line then. I mean, seriously, it's something that a lot of people don't even pay attention to, or a lot of people just tie on 12-pound fluorocarbon because that's what they do. Well, try it lighter, right? And honestly, if try it on a bottom presentation too, because if you break off, big deal, like whatever. It's not like you're losing the fish to win the classic or whatever it may be, but just try those lighter lines. But more importantly, set your drag right. And one of the biggest things people ask me is, why do you run all Vanfords or why do you run all Stratics? And the number one reason I tell them is the drags are so good on those reels that they will assist you in catching more fish. Because when I tell a customer to set a hook on like a Ned rig or a tube that's way out there is no hook set, not a hook set in the world. All I tell them to do is reel as fast as they can and do not stop reeling. And when that fish is loaded up, that drag is working so well and so smooth in your favor that all you need to do is just reel into it. There's a gentleman on the Elite Series named Taku Ido, I think is his name. He's from Japan. If you watch him set the hook, if you watch him reel, his drag is so loose, you're asking yourself, how is this fish still even on there? Well, he has that drag so dialed in that he knows exactly what he's doing with the pound rod he's using, a light rod. And all he's doing is reeling right into that drag. Drags nowadays have gotten so good. Use them in your favor. It's funny. I get old timers asking all the time, "Oh, where's the back reel on this reel?" Back reel is such a it's almost comical. But where I'm going with this is use those drags, because back in the day we didn't have the same drags we have now. And truly, from like a smallmouth presentation or even like a big walleye presentation, those drags are set up for you to not over reel, but you can over reel into the drag, if that makes sense. And the drags help you so much when using that light line.
Yeah, the back reeling thing for me has always been a Midwest thing.
Oh yeah,
it's always been a Midwest thing. And like you said, you're 100% right. The old drags are not like the new, cross carbon drags that we have in the Vanfords and in the Stratics and the felt drags. So I get that part of it. The line diameter thing that you mentioned, I mean, Dale, the best explanation I can give you on all of this is that the thicker the diameter of line, the more line you need to maintain bottom contact with a specific weight. So let's say you're dragging a 3/8 ounce tube. I guarantee you will have less line out to hit bottom constantly with a 5-pound Power Pro than you will with 10.
Yeah.
And that's why I think Spencer is so adamant about the 5-pound.
Yeah, and you're feeling wind too, because what happens in wind when you have like a 10-pound braid, for example, is you bomb it out and you're not dropping your line immediately to the bottom. Well, it's like 10-pound braid, it's like 5-pound braid. The wind hitting that line is so much bigger, and that's not only with using that lighter stuff, is I'm not seeing a crazy feel or advantage in the feel side of it. I'm seeing a crazy advantage in how it fishes and how the wind portrays it, how the wind affects it. So yeah, man, use lighter line. And I think those presentations that you've used for years, we've all used for years, are going to be more beneficial for you.
So I'll bring you a question here before I get to the next one. I got one coming up about big Lakers, but let's talk a little bit about line diameter on the fluorocarbon and mono side, because this is a big bone of contention for me.
Yeah.
I use mono and fluoro from a specific – I'm not going to even mention the manufacturer, but I will tell you this. Not all 10 pounds are the same diameter.
100%.
Give me your thoughts on this, Spencer, because I know you probably – if you're as technical as I am, you're going to be all over this.
Yeah. I mean, I've always been kind of a fluorocarbon guy. And like in the side of it that I love the strength of it. And again, I am dealing with people of all different levels of angling or as angling experience. So, in a tournament situation for me, I like a 6 to 8 pound fluorocarbon. And I run a lot of long leads. So I'll run like a 20 to 25 foot lead. Or, if that's too long for some people and they're having a tough time with it, I'll shorten it down to like 15 or 18. But the number one thing that I use, And the number one thing that's helped me is the knot. I strictly use FG knots. I don't tie anything other than an FG knot because I can now run a really, really long lead. And people say you get no stretch with fluorocarbon. That's not necessarily true. You're going to get some kind of, you're going to get a little bit of stretch with fluorocarbon. You're not going to get nearly the same stretch you're going to get with mono, but you're definitely going to get some stretch with like the 6 to 8 pound fluorocarbon. But the number one thing with line, whether you're using fluorocarbon or you're using mono, is the knot. The knot is so important. And one place you learn knots is the ocean because the fish in the ocean don't care. They will wreck you. They don't care if it's not an FG knot. It's almost like they know, and they're just going to do whatever they can to break it, and they will. So back to the fluoro mono thing, there's certain scenarios like dragging a Ned rig, dragging a tube. I love mono. I mean, you can't get away from mono. One of the difficult things with mono is the feel. I get it. It's hard to feel. You know, you're not going to feel a bite per se on mono. You're going to feel difference. You're going to feel mush. You're going to feel, what was that? Set the hook. Hook sets are free. Set the hook on everything you feel. If you're setting the hook into bottom too much, well, then maybe you're not fishing the proper bottom for mono. Maybe then try braid because you're going to have a little bit more feel. You're going to be able to bump it, nudge it through the rocks or whatever you need to do. But mono is a tricky one. Mono is an old school thing, and a lot of super dialed in bass guys will use mono in certain scenarios. But again, if you're confident with braid, don't think you need to use mono. I mean, mono can be difficult to feel. It can be difficult to persuade your mind into thinking, what was that? And by the time you say that, it's too late. You're just going to be missing fish. So, the mono braid thing, as far as leaders, man, I would stick to fluorocarbon. It's stronger. It's tougher. If you're in a rocky, muscly bottom, it's going to hold up better for you. And then that goes back to the knot. Use the FG knot and tie long leads, 20-foot leads, 15-foot leads, nothing really shorter than 15, honestly. So yeah, that's a good question. I see another one here from Dale with the connection now. We kind of talked about the FG thing.
That's why you started talking about the FG, so I figured
FG is, yeah, no, I saw that. Yeah, FG is the only knot, man. I mean, I tied the Alberto knot for years. The problem with the Alberto knot is it breaks down, it uncoils, it'll recoil on itself. The FG knot is a tricky one because people think, I teach people how to tie the FG knot daily, honestly, because there's so many bad videos on how to tie an FG knot. There's a way that I do it. I can do it on slack line, and I can do it, honestly, probably just as fast as an Alberto, a double uni, whatever it may be, and take the time to learn it. You guys are all at home right now sitting in your computer. You could be tying an FG knot right now. Learn it. It's the number one knot in the game, and if you're not doing it, it's going to change the way you fish, honestly. As weird as that sounds, have you
seen this?
I hate using this word, but it's a game changer.
Have you seen this thing here?
I have. Yeah, I have. A customer showed me that. Yeah.
So that's the newest thing. I mean, I've been tying FG for a while. That interests me.
Yeah, that's cool. Again, JP, I've learned now to just do it on slack line, and that would be cool if you need to tie it on tight line. But there's a YouTube video. I don't remember. This was years ago when I found it, but it's a saltwater video, and this guy ties it on slack line. You guys need to find it. It's like,
is it through the 3 fingers? Is it with your 3 fingers?
No. Honestly, all I do is I take the fluorocarbon, I lay it in my hand. I have a braid coming from the tip of my rod. I lay the braid over. I hold it. I bring the braid under. I hold it, and then I take the braid over, I hold it. And what it is it's more finger placement and how you pinch the line. You pinch the line really hard and you wrap it tight, you bring it tight. And then once it's on the fluorocarbon, you kind of pull it back down. Again, this is all like I'm speaking a foreign language, but you need to figure out how to tie them on slack line because the slack line thing is going to be a game changer in the boat because everybody's like, oh, I can't tie them in the boat, the wind, whatever. I could tie them I could tie them in whatever wind you want. And it's so amazing once you learn that knot because there's so many scenarios where you're like in the back of your head, you're like, man, I wish I had a longer lead right now. Or man, I really don't want to tie this. I could leave an FG knot for 3 days and not retie it. Now, if I'm in a tournament, I'm going to retie it. But if I'm just, fun fishing with buddies, I'll leave an FG knot go for 3-4 days because that's how strong they're a great knot. Use them. Seriously.
I've left it over the winter. I've actually left them over the winter to the spring and fired them out first trip.
Yeah,
and they work fine.
Yeah, For sure. Yep.
All right, so let's get to that Laker question. Jonathan from our Facebook page is asking, how do you target big Lakers in midsummer? What presentation? He doesn't have a fancy trolling setup or downriggers.
Yeah, no, that's a good question. I get it. It's a great question, actually. Lakers love dark, cold water in the summer, but they'll also suspend. And what I mean by that is if you have like a reef or a hump that is adjacent to really deep water, they'll move up on those humps to feed. And then when they move off that hump, they'll kind of suspend. So where I'm going with this is if you don't want to use a downrigger, which I get it. Downriggers they're intimidating, they're annoying, they're whatever you want to call them. You can get down to those depths with lead core. You can get down to those depths with dipsy divers, and just know that you don't necessarily need to be on the bottom per se, but you need to be closer to structure because you got to have the mindset of those fish are going to roll up on a piece of structure. But when they roll off of it and they suspend, that's going to be your nearest chance at picking one off, coming from a feeding moment or going to a feeding moment. And the biggest thing is lead core, man. Lead core is a great tactic for trout, salmon, anything in the middle of summer. And my region here on Lake Michigan, I don't have a ton of lake trout. Lake Superior obviously has more of the lake trout population. But dipsy divers, lead core, copper, you could even use snap weights if you really want to get to the bottom. You could use a 12-ounce snap weight. All it is a red offshore clip. Make nothing, drop it to the bottom. I mean, as dumb as it sounds, drop it to the bottom. And, pick it up. You only need to be within 10, 20 feet of the bottom, and they're going to eat it. And you can put that on a plane. You can put that on a planer board. You could hold that. There's certain scenarios where you could use it on a outrigger if you have them. Obviously, probably not if you don't have downriggers. But, yeah, I mean, a snap weight, big one. Dipsy diver is a big one. Lead core. But, again, don't be afraid to fish suspended lake trout for in the middle of summer either.
How about vertical jigging them,
yeah,
Spencer?
We
do a lot of targeting.
Yeah. One thing I do with lake trout is I do a lot of drifting. So I'll drift like a big hair jig, or I'll drift a big jigging spoon, or I'll drift a big piece of chunk bait, whether it be a piece of sucker, belly of a sucker, or belly of a smaller lake trout or whatever. But vertical jigging is a deadly tactic. You just kind of got to make sure you're on them because you don't want to be just wasting your time vertically over nothing. And if you're in an area where like you're on the edge of that structure and you have a decent wind, 5 to 10 mile an hour wind, you're just drifting, just drag it, bomb it out, dump your spool and just drift and just go. And if you get bit, again, don't set the hook, just start reeling. But vertical jigging is deadly. You just have to know what you're fishing, I guess, and you got to make sure you're on them. And again, just drive around and look for them. And then once you're on them, jig them. But yeah, for sure. If you're looking to troll till you find them and then jig them for sure.
Yeah, electronics go a long way. I mean, paying attention to them, finding those fish stacked up on a drop-off, it's I think for me, I don't think I like anything more than it's like butterfly jigging in saltwater, right? Like pop down to them and start popping away. Yeah. All right, so Sam from our Facebook page is asking, what strategies do you use for locating smallmouth in different seasons?
Boy, that's a question we could probably talk about for a few days, JP. The strategies for the spring and honestly the fall too, not so much in the summer, but by spring, I mean, in my region and a lot of regions like JP's probably, like end of March through call it beginning of June. The number one thing I'm looking for with smallmouth that time of year is water temperature, wind, and current. If the water temperature is right, the wind is right, and there's some current, I'll bet my life on it there's smallmouth there. If I move into October, I'm looking for a cooling trend. I'm going to generally, as dumb as this sounds, I'm going to fish the coldest water within realm of the region, but I want to fish a cooling trend. I want to basically be in the area where the water's cooling because the bait's going to be there. In the summertime, the water temperature is not a huge aspect depending on the region. Summertime is more of a location as far as is the reef close to a shoreline that they came off of on spawn, or is that reef loaded with gobies? Is that reef loaded with a deep side of alowives? Whatever it may be. But the strategies for smallmouth in different seasons, man, the biggest thing I would tell you is pay attention to the wind, the current, and the temperature. The only time that's really not going to play into factor, again, temperature-wise and wind and current, is going to probably be in the summer. But, man, water temperature is everything, Sam. Pay attention to it. Wind is everything. If you're fishing a shoreline that's not windy and there is wind on another shoreline, man, you got to be on the windy stuff. If you're fishing a reef and the wind's blowing out of the north, fish the north side of the reef. If you're realizing there's a south current and the wind's coming out of the south, you better be on the south side of the reef. Just little stuff like that, you know. But again, my number one tool, and again, I'm speaking pretty Great Lakes and not so much inland waters, is water temp and current. It's everything, man. Once you learn that current, once you learn that temp and how they set up on it in a bay or wherever it may be on a shoreline, you know, and it's something as simple as, if you're fishing a shoreline, let's say, and you started on the north side of the shoreline and it was 53 on the north side, and you get down to the south side and all of a sudden you're now down into the 49s, get out of there, leave. You're not going to see fish there. Those fish are so smart. They're so intrigued. They're going to they're going to swim quarter mile, half mile, whatever it may be, to find that warmest water. And once you find the warm water, you're also going to notice one thing. It's going to probably be dirtier too. Always fish the dirtiest water you can find in the spring. Always fish the dirtiest water you can find in the fall. Bait feels comfortable in dirty water. Other fish feel comfortable in dirty water, whether they're big or small. Fish attract each other. It's just the nature of how they swim. And just find that dirty water, find that warm water, and there's going to be fish there. I'll guarantee it. It's a good question. Broad question.
All right,
we can talk
Sam,
about that for weeks.
Hopefully that helps you out. Some great information from Spencer. Again, folks, this is a Shimano School. We do this every other Tuesday of the week on both Facebook and YouTube. Tonight we've got Spencer Samplawski joining us. We're talking all about targeting big fish. But Spencer is one of those guys that kind of targets a bit of everything. Spencer, you spend your winters in Florida as well, I understand, by Marco Island guiding.
Yeah. I'm down in Southwest Florida. I spend the winter down there. I spent last winter down there just learning and kind of figuring it out. And then this winter I'm going to kind of dive full in. I didn't really, quote unquote, guide last year. I just kind of fished with buddies and try to figure it out. But this year I'm going to actually go down for a stint of like 5 months probably, and just kind of spend my winter down there, head down there in January, come back first part of May. I'm actually not going to do my April walleye run anymore. I'm getting older. My hands are getting weaker. I can't do it anymore, guys. So I'm going to spend my stint down there this winter, and I love it down there, man. I'll tell you what, one thing that the ocean will do for you is it will make you a better angler on so many different sides, whether it be the technicality of it or how, you know, saltwater fish relate to freshwater fish and how the wind affects them, how the current affects them. But one thing it did for me was I learned so many tactics down there that I can use here. And more honestly, on the flip side, I can use stuff that I know here and have known here down there. So yeah, man, Florida's great. I recommend anyone who lives in the Midwest to get out of the Midwest in the winter for at least a week, a year. Your mind will be better. Get out of here. It's cold up here in the winter.
That it is. All right, so this is a good question from Matthew on our YouTube channel. How do you choose when to run spoons? FF, probably flasher and fly.
Yep.
Or meat rigs on Michigan for salmon.
Yeah, that's a great question. You know, I run a lot of spoons. I run a lot of actually standard spoons. I'm not a big Magnum spoons. And what I mean by that for the people watching is a standard spoon smaller, Magnum spoons are bigger. I love spoons. I've always run spoons, you know, and this question is very regionally based. And what I mean by that is, you know, for example, I'm up in Sturgeon Bay, and you could go 50 miles south of here, or you could go to Lake Ontario, where I know they run a lot of flasher flies and flasher flies. My region's a lot of spoons. Now, again, other regions may be more flasher flies. I personally like spoons. I like that big natural whip. Flasher flies can be very technical. You have to know exactly the perfect length. I don't think a lot of people will tell you this, but I will, because you guys are all watching. I run a 22 to 23 inch fly, and I am very, very, very true to that. And a lot of places may be different. The regions, you know, where they set up that distance might be different. But where I'm going with this is the flasher fly thing to me is there's more room for error. It's a lot more speed driven. I like to go slower with a flasher fly, whereas if I go with a spoon and I get on a turn and that spoon's fluttering, now it's falling, flasher flies need to be spinning, right? So the spoon thing to me, I just feel for the time that my bait's in the water, I'm benefiting myself by having a spoon versus a flasher fly, because if the flasher fly is not moving, you're not going to get bit. It's just kind of dull in the water, and it's just kind of coming through wherever it may be. Meat rigs, I run a lot of meat rigs later in the year when I go deep. And what I mean by that is right now I'm fishing shallow just because the fish are in shallow because the bait's in shallow. But meat rigs are a very, very overlooked a tool. They can be kind of a pain. I get it. They're not super easy. You know, you got to have good herring, whatever you're using for cut bait. But meat rigs are deadly. You don't catch a lot of fish on them, but the fish you catch on them are definitely bigger. But again, if I was looking at it from a beginning standpoint, or someone just looking to get into it, man, I would run spoons. They're so much truer. They're so much easier to run. You know, you can dial in color a little bit more. You know, I'll just tell you kind of my standard setup right now. My boat is I run 4 dipsies, depending on how many people I have. But I always have 2 dipsies down. I have 2 highs, and I have flasher flies on both of them. Last week I couldn't keep them in the water. This week I haven't had a bite on them. So it's how it goes. It's tough to say whether they work, whether they don't. You know, spoons are, in my opinion, they always work. If they're not eating spoons, you're probably not catching any salmon. But spoons work good. You know, I'd use them before I'd use a flasher fly if you're not super experienced. The flasher fly thing, you've got to be dialed on it. It's very specific. Meat rigs, you can get away a little bit more with, you know, a little bit more room for error, margin of error there. But stick to spoons, man. It's true. They work. They're true. They're good. You can't go wrong.
All right, Matthew, hopefully that one helps you out a bit. One more. We're already at 56 minutes, if you can believe that, Spencer.
Wow, it's crazy.
Time does go by quickly when we're having fun. Yeah, it's crazy. This happens every 2 weeks when we do this. I'm like, I look up and I'm like, oh my God, it's almost been an hour already. This one is more of on the technical side, and I'm not sure if you want to handle this or you want me to handle something like this.
Oh, man.
Andrew Sisson is asking, difference between the Kronark MGL and the G.
Yeah, you know, JP, I'm probably going to leave that one with you. I use a lot of spinning reels, Andrew. I am not a crazy bait caster, and the reason I say that is I don't do a ton of largemouth fishing because we don't have largemouth here. So I fish a lot of smallmouth. And my go-to reel, just so I can get this out there, is that 3000 Vanford. I used to be a 2500 Vanford guy, but I'm going to tell you something. I was one of those guys that loved that OG, and a lot of you know this, that OG Stratic CF4 with the foam handle. I loved it. And the reason I loved it was because of the finesse feel of it. It just kind of fit in your palm right. And I thought I could get away with it and run the 2500 reel size of the handle, but I really like the flat paddle of the 3000. So I run all 3000 Vanfords now for my spinning setups. And if I do run, you know, a bait caster, I'll run more like a metanium size, smaller metanium bait caster, or in the salt, I run a lot of tranks. The tranks down there are deadly, but I'm going to let JP get to the kronark side of it, because that's more of a technicality, probably more of a largemouth question, I would imagine.
Well, it's more, I think this is more of a text question. The MGL kronark and the G was developed for saltwater inshore, you know, Gulf Coast specs and red fishing. So the only difference really, Andrew, is that the G has a specially plated pinion and that water drain port that I talked about earlier that helps with saltwater, because saltwater destroys everything. Now, the Kronark MGL, we don't recommend for saltwater. It is a freshwater reel. The main difference is that it has the MGL Magnum Light spool. And what that is it's a reduced weight spool that allows casting of lighter baits a lot easier. It's got a lower startup inertia. And it also allows just general casting to be easier and more fluent. So between the two of them, if you like to fish both, I would go with the G. If you like to cast lighter baits like spy baits, or lighter stuff like 1/8 ounce, 3/16 ounce jigs, stuff like that on casting, the MGL is really tough to beat. But outside of that, frame-wise, SVS Infinity, both have micro module gearing, both have SVS Infinity braking, both have X-Ship, really well-built reels, just a little bit different in what their approach is. All right, so let's see. Let's follow up on Jonathan here, who asked about the Lakers. So he says he vertical jigs 90% of the time. is there a preferred bait to catch bigger fish instead of smaller ones? And this might be something that you talk about, Spencer, about the lake. Some lakes just have lots of small lakers. So
no.
And mostly uses ice fishing bait, jigging baits. Is live bait better?
Yeah, it really depends on the region, Jonathan, as far as, for example, like if I'm up in northern Manitoba, there's one of the best baits for a big fish is a dead bait on the bottom. And that's going to be a tool, will be a Cisco, something just laying on the bottom, as dumb as it sounds. You're not going to get a lot of bites, but you're going to get a big bite. Usually put that on a tip up or some kind of set line. But as far as the vertical stuff, fish are fish, and small fish love up and down movement. So you're probably going to catch a lot of small fish doing it. But, the biggest thing I tell people is you're catching. It's good. Everything you do is a stat. You're catching fish. It's a statistic that's going to help you. And don't think that just because you're catching, 50 small ones doesn't mean there's not a 40-inch lake trout around there, because there definitely are. I mean, unless it's a smaller inland water where, your chances aren't there. I get that. It's difficult to weed through those, and people's mindset as well. And if I want bigger fish, I need to go deeper. That's not necessarily true. If you're catching small ones, just know there's big ones around and they're in the area. You could try upsizing your bait. You could also try downsizing your bait. You could also try using more of a cut bait presentation, because it may be something that, as far as a scent, that they're not liking, the big ones, and the little ones are eating it because they're immature and they're not as mature as a big one. But yeah, it's a tough question. I've run into this a lot, ice fishing lake trout in Ontario, and it's honestly, man, it's probably more of the lake than it is your presentation. There's just probably aren't as many big ones there as you may think there are. But they're definitely there. I mean, don't give up on it for sure, but just know that if you're catching, it's a stat, and it's a positive stat for you, for sure.
All right, last two. You good with this, Spencer? I got two more for you.
Yep, absolutely.
All right, so Sam is asking. Yeah, Sam's asking, how do you usually determine what depth to fish for salmon, both lure depth and bottom depth? And I know you mentioned earlier you use the heck out of your speed and temp sensor.
Yeah.
So he's fishing salmon out of Sturgeon Bay and Bailey's as well.
For sure. Yeah, I think I've actually run into Sam at the ramp before. I think you fished with your grandpa often. I've seen you guys. Yeah, no, that's a good question, Sam. I like to fish shallow early in the year. And by shallow, I mean like 65 to 100. And that time of year typically changes, like now in July, where you need to start going a little bit deeper. And then, I'll start to move baits down and later in the year, obviously, when I go deeper. But one thing that I would give you as far as some advice, Sam, is start high in the mornings. Fish high stuff in the mornings, high leads, high dipsies, high downriggers. Fish a little bit higher in the column in the mornings. And then as the morning goes on or the evening progresses, start going deeper, or in the evening, start going shallower. It's obviously flipped. But, depth for salmon is a very tricky question, because I'll tell you something, Sam, they don't live in an area. They're the most pelagic freshwater fish that swim. They're constantly moving. They're constantly chasing bait. They're constantly chasing a temp. And that's a really broad question in itself. But depth, start shallow in the spring. Spring is middle of June to beginning of July. July, August into September, go deeper. It sounds very broad, but it's the truth, buddy.
All right. And then, so I got kind of laughing a bit here because PJ is one of my buddies from up here on the St. Lawrence River, and he's asking about catching black bass on a sand flat. PJ, you probably know better than most people how to catch black bass coming up on a sand flat.
Yeah.
So I'm going to laugh at that one because, Bud, I know how good of a fisherman you are.
Sure.
This is the last one we're going to probably take tonight from Tyler over on our YouTube channel. What observations help you decide between using finesse tactics and faster reaction baits like cranks and jerk baits? I think it's a great question.
That's a great question. Again, that's one of those questions we could probably talk about for weeks. The biggest thing with finesse versus more of a reaction bait is everything's got to set up right for the reaction bait, in my opinion, whereas the finesse side of things, I hate to say it, but they're always going to work. I think with the reaction thing, I think we get stuck in this mindset of like, oh my God, the wind's blowing, I have to throw a jerk bait. Well, that's true, but I also think there's a finesse side of it, and I am just very, very confident in my finesse tactics. I think finesse tactics for me as a guide are a lot easier to teach. So, and they're a lot safer. I mean, cranks and jerkbaits are kind of dangerous in a boat sometimes with 3 people. But cranks and jerks, man, they have their place for sure. It's just hard to know exactly like when to turn the switch. And the number one way I can tell you is throw a jerkbait for 15 minutes, throw a finesse tactic for 15 minutes, throw a jerkbait for 15 minutes, throw a finesse. And you kind of got to like stay in that mindset. And if you start catching more fish on finesse, stay in the finesse mindset. If you start catching fish on more of a reaction mindset, stay in the reaction. The reaction side too is a very time of year. Early in the spring, cold water, jerkbaits may work better, finesse may work better. So again, it's a day-to-day deal. I think in the fall, you're going to be able to get away a lot more with reaction bait, cranks, jerks, big swim baits, A-rigs, stuff like that. So it's a time of year thing. It's a confidence thing. It's a day-to-day thing. You've got to try both of them. And if you're confident with the finesse thing, stick with the finesse thing, man. I'll tell you what, it works. It always works, to be honest with you.
And I'm going to just quickly address PJ's question because he's saying sometimes it takes him 40 minutes to catch that fish. By the way, PJ, congrats on the new rig. I saw the pictures of it. Awesome looking boat you just picked up. For me, PJ, when it comes to catching bass that come up on a sand flat, I have like a 3 bait approach that I usually throw. Okay, so for me, a 2.8 Jackal rhythm wave on a 1/8 ounce jig head will be my first thing. And I kind of like to swim that around like you would just straight reel it. And then if the fish is interested in chasing, that gives me a sign. The other thing I like to do is have a drop shot set up, but then a Ned rig would be the third thing. So if I can't catch that bass that I'm seeing with those 3 baits within a 10-minute window, I usually leave them alone for a while because I feel like they're just not in that mood. And I don't know if you feel the same way, Spencer, because you get a lot of shallow bass rolling up in the Sturgeon Bay area. Do you have the same kind of mentality?
Yeah, I think the biggest thing is just don't work the bait. Leave it on the bottom and leave it there. I think that like when a fish is sitting there in sand doing nothing, it's there. It's either resting, but it could potentially feed because it's close to a rock pile or a mud transition, whatever. But throw an Ned rig out, just leave it there. Like drop it in his face, drift your boat off of it, dump your spool, open your spool, and drift away from it and leave it there. And the minute you feel something different or you feel something not right, set the hook because it's there. But the biggest thing with like a fish that's not biting for 10 minutes, he knows you're there. The one other thing you could try is scent. There's so many different scent products out there. And I know whether one works better or not than the other, use scent. Scent works. There's days where I prove it big time prove it in the spring. And it's whether you're applying it every 10th cast, every 5th cast. If you're seeing a fish down there, apply it, drop it. He's probably going to bite it and drift away from it.
It's funny. I just did some work with a company on a scent thing, and I learned there's a really, really great scientist out of Queen's University. I don't know if you've ever seen Dr. Bruce Tuff's stuff. He does a lot of stuff on gobies, on nests and predation. Yeah. And he did studies on fizzing smallmouth from deep water. And I had a talk with him about scents the other day, and it was really interesting because he explained to me how the fish's receptors in their mouths can accept certain things but cannot accept others. And one of the things that blocks their taste buds is oil-based scents. And I didn't know this. Now, oil-based scents, we've known over the years, they come in spray form, all kinds of forms. They work really well because they stick to a bait.
Sure, yeah.
Because they're not water soluble.
Yeah, right.
But now he explained to me that they did a bunch of tests and they actually blocks the fish's taste receptors. So I found that kind of interesting. So I'm waiting to hear more from Bruce about that, just to see. But I agree with you with the scent. I think the scent gives you 2 things. It might give them the willingness to eat, but more so hold on to it longer. Correct. Because you're dead stick to that bait. Yeah. And give you a chance to set the hook. So PJ, dude, I hope that helps you out. Do a good job breaking in that motor of yours. Make sure you get it done right, and I hope you enjoy that boat. But I think that's it, folks. An hour and 10 minutes already. Spencer, I want to take some time to thank you on behalf of Shimano.
Thank you, guys.
Really appreciate you tuning in. Yeah, really, really great information. Folks, Again, this is another episode of Shimano School. If you can, click the like button or the share button, tag a buddy in the comment section. These are going to live on both YouTube and Facebook. And we do them every other week. So we go from freshwater to saltwater and back and forth. So thanks, everybody, for tuning in. Super appreciate it. Hope you guys have a great night.
Awesome, guys.
Spencer, be good.
Thanks, guys.